All right, jumping into B.F. Skinner. His book, Science and Human Behavior, like a classic, right? For understanding, well, why we do the things we do.
Absolutely, yeah. Skinner really flips the script on how we think about behavior. He's all about building a true science of behavior, one that's rooted in what we can actually see and measure.
Okay, I'm all for being scientific, but human behavior, that's messy. So many things going on in our heads, right?
All right.
Thoughts, feelings, instincts, all that.
That's exactly what Skinner's getting at. He says focusing on all that internal stuff, it can actually throw us off. We start making up explanations that sound good, but they don't really help us predict or change behavior.
So we should just ignore what's going on inside. Seems a bit extreme, no?
Not ignore, but maybe shift our focus. Instead of saying, oh, someone ate a whole cake because of weak willpower, what if we looked at what happened before the cake? Stressed, skipped lunch, celebrating. Those are things we can actually observe.
So instead of these vague inner causes, we need to look at the environment.
Exactly. Skinner's argument is that behavior is a function of the environment. All the external factors that influence our actions, past experiences, social stuff, even basic things like hunger or thirst.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture.
Yeah.
But how do we actually analyze behavior this way? It feels like a million environmental things to consider.
That's where functional analysis comes in. Think of
Yeah.
it like detective work. What happened before the behavior? What happened right after? Any patterns? Like, if your car is making a weird noise, you don't just say, oh, it's broken. You try to figure out, when does that noise happen? Under what conditions?
That's a great analogy. So instead of saying they're always late because they're irresponsible, we'd look at, are they late for everything? Or just certain things? Do they take on too much? Are there obstacles in their way?
Exactly. You're thinking like a behavior analyst now. And once you understand those environmental pieces, behavior starts to make more sense, even if it seemed irrational at first.
This is making sense.
Yeah.
Can you give me like a real-life example, something concrete?
Sure. Even something as simple as drinking water. Skinner uses that example, actually. It seems basic, but tons of factors go into it. Are they thirsty? Did they just have something salty? What are their, cultural norms around drinking?
Wait, cultural norms matter for drinking water.
Totally. Think about it. In some cultures, you finish your drink, it's polite. Others, it's rude. That can affect how much someone drinks, even if they're not physically thirsty.
Wow, I never thought of it like that. So it's not just basic needs, but also these social and cultural things that are shaping how we act.
You got it. Skinner's point is, instead of blaming behavior on some mystery force inside us, we've got to investigate the external factors that are really at play.
This is like a whole new way of seeing things. But if the environment is so influential, does that mean we don't have free will?
Yeah, that's a question for the ages, not one we'll solve here.
Yeah.
But Skinner would say focusing on free will, it's not that helpful for understanding or changing behavior. Instead, by understanding the environmental things that influence our choices, we actually gain more control, not less.
More control. How so?
Well, think about it. If you understand what makes someone tick, what motivates them, what triggers certain behaviors, you're in a much better position to help them make different choices. It's not about controlling people, it's about empowering them. Change the environment in a way that supports positive change.
That makes sense. But people are complicated. How can we possibly account for every single factor that plays a role?
Right, it's not about having perfect information or creating some kind of behavioral equation, but by looking at what's observable, what we can measure, we can start making more sense of why people do what they do. And that's powerful for understanding ourselves and everyone around us.
This has been eye-opening, seriously. Debunking those inner cause myths and then understanding how powerful functional analysis can be. Where do we go from here?
Well, now that we've got some of Skinner's core ideas down, let's see how they've actually been put into practice. Specifically, the field of applied behavior analysis, or ABA. It takes these concepts and uses them to make a real difference in people's lives.
ABA. I hear that a lot, but what does it actually do? It's not just about, training animals, right?
No, definitely not just animals. Although, yeah, those principles are definitely used there too. ABA is all about taking, the science of behavior and using it to help people in really meaningful ways.
Okay, so taking Skinner's ideas out of the lab and into the real world. Give me a concrete example. I need something to picture.
Okay, let's say you have a child who throws a lot of tantrums. Instead of just saying, oh, they're being difficult, an ABA therapist, they'd want to understand the function of those tantrums. What's triggering them? What's the purpose they serve for that child? Is it to get out of doing something they don't like, get attention, or maybe to get something they want?
So we're back to that functional analysis idea. We're trying to figure out what's happening in the environment that's keeping that behavior going.
Exactly. Once you know the function, then you can make a plan to teach that child some better ways to communicate what they need or cope with those tough situations. So, for example, if the tantrums are to escape something, you might teach them to ask for a break or ask for help.
Makes sense. It's like giving them tools to express themselves, but without having to resort to, like, disruptive behavior.
Right. And that's a big part of ABA. It's all about teaching new skills and behaviors. This can involve breaking down complex tasks into smaller steps, giving clear instructions and prompts, and using positive reinforcement to really encourage that progress.
Positive reinforcement. So we're talking about rewards, like giving someone a gold star when they do something good.
Rewards can be one type, yeah, but it's bigger than that. It's anything that increases the chance of a behavior happening again. Could be verbal praise, a high five, getting to do a favorite activity, even just getting a desired outcome. The key is that it's got to be something the individual actually finds reinforcing.
Gotcha. So it's not about finding like the perfect reward that works for every single person, but figuring out what actually motivates that specific individual.
Exactly. Individualization is huge in ABA. What works for one person might not work for another. And that's why collecting data is so important in ABA. Tracking how someone responds to different interventions so you can adjust as you go, find what's really effective.
Sounds very scientific. But are there like challenges to applying these principles in real life? People aren't always predictable,
Oh,
right?
for sure. Human behavior, it's complex. One challenge with ABA is making sure the interventions are really tailored, to
No.
each person's unique needs and situation. And another is that you really need consistency, follow through.
Consistency, what do you mean by that?
Well, imagine teaching a kid to raise their hand instead of yelling out in class. It's not enough to just teach them that skill in therapy, right? It needs to be reinforced in the classroom, at home, every setting, basically. That takes collaboration, good communication between therapists, parents, teachers, everyone involved.
So it's not just a quick fix. It's a real commitment, long-term support from a whole team.
Exactly. It really does take a village. And that brings up another question. What happens when those supports start to fade away? How do you make sure those positive changes, the ones you see in therapy, how do you make them last? That's something ABA folks are always working on, developing strategies for generalization and maintenance of skills.
Generalization.
Yeah.
So it's not enough to just learn a skill in one specific place.
Right. Think about learning to ride a bike. You might need training wheels at first, a patient teacher, but the goal is for you to ride on your own, confidently in different places.
Okay, yeah. This all makes a lot of sense. It's cool to see how these principles can apply to so many different things. But I'm curious, what about those internal states we talked about before, like feelings and thoughts, emotions? Does ABA address those at all?
That's a great question, and one that definitely causes some debate. Traditionally, ABA has really focused on what you can see, observable behaviors. But more and more, there's this understanding that thoughts and feelings, even if we can't directly see them, they can still affect behavior.
So we're not ignoring the inner world completely.
Not at all. Newer ABA approaches, they're actually starting to include strategies that target what are sometimes called private events, things like anxiety, self-doubt, negative thoughts.
Okay, but how do you work with something you can't directly see or measure?
It's definitely a bit more indirect, but the principles are similar. So instead of trying to change thoughts and feelings head on, you focus on changing the behaviors that go along with them.
I'm not sure I follow. Can you give me an example?
Sure, let's say someone has social anxiety. Instead of just saying, relax or don't be anxious, not helpful, right? You might teach them specific skills to manage that anxiety in social situations, like deep breathing exercises or how to start a conversation with just a simple hello.
Ah, I see. So by changing what they're doing on the outside, you might actually impact how they're feeling on the inside.
Exactly. And over time, as they have some success, they build confidence in those situations. Those anxious thoughts and feelings, they may start to decrease too.
Wow, this is really interesting. ABA seems so much more nuanced than I realized. It's not just about rewards and punishments. It's about understanding the whole person, teaching new skills, and creating an environment that really supports that positive change.
You got it. And that's what makes it so exciting, honestly. ABA is constantly evolving, driven by data, compassion, and a real respect for the people it serves. But just like any powerful approach, we got to consider the ethics, right? So let's wrap up by talking about some of those considerations and clear up a few common misconceptions about ABA. It's a tool, right? Like any tool, it can be misused. So ethical guidelines, professional standards, those are crucial. Think of it like, I don't know, a powerful medication. It can be amazing when used correctly, but potentially really harmful if it's misused.
Okay, that makes sense. So what kind of, like, ethical safeguards are there to make sure ABA isn't misused?
Well, first and foremost, ethical ABA, it always starts with informed consent. That means the person receiving the services or their guardian, if they can't consent themselves, they got to fully understand what ABA is all about and
Mhm.
agree to it. You're not forcing anything on anyone.
Okay, yeah, that's essential. But even with consent, how do we make sure it's used the right way? Not in a way that could actually hurt someone.
That's where those professional standards come in. Ethical guidelines for ABA practitioners, they stress things like individualized treatment plans, making sure you're collecting data, and doing regular reviews of the interventions. It's all about constantly checking, is this working? Making adjustments, and always putting the individual's well-being first.
So it's not like set it and forget it. You're constantly watching, making tweaks based on how the person is responding.
Right. And a really important point. Ethical ABA emphasizes positive reinforcement and avoids punishment whenever possible. The goal is to teach skills, help people make positive changes, not force compliance through things that are aversive.
That makes me think of another concern I've heard, that ABA tries to, like, force people with disabilities to fit into some idea of normal. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a common misconception, but it's definitely important to address. The goal of ABA, it's not to erase differences or make everyone act the same. It's about helping people learn skills, develop behaviors that let them live more fulfilling lives on their terms.
So, like, helping someone learn to communicate better, it doesn't mean they have to stop doing other things that are part of who they are, even if those things might seem a little atypical.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance, right? Supporting individual expression while also teaching skills that help people navigate the world and reach their goals. And remember, normal. That's subjective, and it's always changing. What matters is respecting each person's unique qualities and helping them thrive as they are.
I love that. Empowering people, not trying to squeeze them into some box.
Absolutely. Ethical ABA, it's about collaboration, respect, and treating each person as an individual. It's working with them, not doing things to them, and always trying to get better, make sure we're living up to those ethical standards.
This conversation has really shown me how much ethics matter in ABA. It's clear that this approach has so much potential to help people, but only if it's used responsibly and with respect.
Couldn't agree more. And don't forget, ABA is a field that's always growing and changing. We're always learning, refining how we do things, making sure our practices are based on the latest science and ethical guidelines.
So for someone who's totally new to this, what are, like, the main takeaways about ABA and the ethical side of things?
I'd say, first of all, do your research. Learn about ABA. Check out those ethical guidelines we mentioned. And find qualified professionals who really prioritize ethical individualized treatment.
Great advice. Being informed is so important. Being able to advocate for yourself or the people you care about.
Definitely. And remember, ABA is not a one-size-fits-all thing. It's about finding what works best for each person and being willing to constantly evaluate and adjust based on their needs and how they're progressing.
Well, this deep dive has really changed how I see ABA. It's not just about changing behavior, it's about understanding the why behind it,
Yeah.
respecting the individual, and then using that knowledge to help people live richer, more fulfilling lives.
Perfectly said. It's been great exploring this with you, and I hope our listeners found this deep dive helpful and informative.
I'm sure they did. And for everyone listening, keep those questions coming, keep learning, and watch out for our next deep dive into another fascinating topic.